Shalom Pekudei Tafshin Pei Beis. Baruch Hashem, once again, due to a simcha, we are broadcasting this year from a remote location, and Baruch Hashem, it's for good reasons. And Mir Hashem, next week we hope to be back once again at our regular location. So here we are, Parshas Pekudei, Shabbos Chazak, and unbelievably, the entire Seder Shemois is going to be behind us. And it's a Seder that covered so much from Shibud Mitzrayim, Geulas Mitzrayim, Kriyas Yamsuf, Kabbalas HaTorah, the Mishkan that we've been discussing the past few weeks, and really so many lessons and so much to internalize and to learn from, and hopefully we could tie it up a little with this week's shir and give us something sort of to pack together and give us lessons going forward. And after the parshas of the past few weeks, the Mishkan, as we were building it and talking about the Mishkan is now, the Mishkan is totally built and it's functional. Now we're going to have a Mishkan. And Seder Shemois ends, this week's Parsha ends, by telling us how the Mishkan actually was put together, and it traveled with Klal Yisrael. In the end of Parshas Pekudei, the Pasuk says, Ki anan Hashem ala Mishkan, there was a cloud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the cloud was above the Mishkan Yoimam, during the days. Ve'esh tiyeh laila boy, at night there was a fire, as we know. Le'enei kol beis Yisrael, this is something that was apparent and obvious, and everyone knew it and saw it. The entire Klal Yisrael, this cloud and this fire, bechol maseihem, wherever they traveled, this went along with it. And Rashi tells us that bechol maseihem, all their travels, it alludes to something very interesting. Rashi says that it tells us that it includes the stops too. When the Mishkan stopped, not just when it was traveling, but by all the stops. In other words, that the stops were the same as the travels, as when they were traveling. Just an interesting point, and we'll elaborate a little bit more on it in a couple of minutes during the shir. And the Nesivos Shalom says that we can really explain this also in a very beautiful way, al derech ha'avoda, where we were learning a lesson from it, a lesson in Avodas Hashem, and it's a lesson that we could take with us and use for us constantly in Avodas Hashem. And we know, as we spoke about a bit over the past few weeks, when the Torah told us "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham," that the Torah says the word b'soicham and not b'soichoi, and the Torah is telling us that the real point here of the Mishkan is that each and every person should build a Mishkan for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu would reside inside each and every person, in your home, in your life, in your abode, wherever you might be. It has to be Kiddushem Shamayim. You build a Mishkan, a place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'soich kol echad ve'echad, a place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu will feel comfortable being in your life. And that is each and every person's goal. Every person's goal has to be that. And when one accomplishes that, then you're on your way to being a success. That's what your life is about. Creating Kiddush Hashem, creating a Mishkan where Hashem wants to be in your life. And that's coming closer to Hashem and being with Hashem is really what our life is all about. And the Torah in our Pasuk tells us what you merit for that, says in Nesivos Shalom. You build a Mishkan, you build a place, You construct a place that makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu comfortable to be with you. And the Torah tells us now that there is this cloud. There is an anan. And you know what you get when you build that Mishkan and you succeed in building that Mishkan? You have that cloud and that fire that the Torah tells us is over the Mishkan. That there's a special shmirah for those, is a special shmirah for a Mishkan. And if you build a Mishkan in your life, you have the protection of that cloud. You have the protection of that fire. You have a special shmirah ha'elyoina. And the Torah tells us, B'chol mas'ehem, in all the travels. And that tells us, as we've spoken about in the past, in all the membeis masois, in all the 42 travels and the 42 stops that Klal Yisrael had in the Midbar, every person, similarly, has 42, we don't know what they are, remember we discussed, but you have 42 different stops and different travels in your life. And just as the 42 stops in the Midbar had to go through some tough times, the Torah tells us that it went through Midbar HaGodol, V'Hanoira, Nachash, Saraf, V'Akrav. There were snakes and scorpions and obstacles and so many things in the Midbar, so many things along those 42 stops that Klal Yisrael had to contend with and to deal with. So too, the life of every person, it doesn't always go straight. The life of every person has, just as Klal Yisrael had snakes and scorpions and things that they had to contend with, the life of every person has the challenges and battles. And you have those things along the way that you have to deal with. And just like Klal Yisrael had the protection of Hashem through those obstacles, as long as you had a Mishkan, so too every person has the cloud and the Amud Ha'esh leading the way. You have those things if you concentrate on building a Mishkan in your life. And the Nesivos Shalom brings down from Rabbi Itzalak Kordinover, and he was one of the big Talmidim, the great Talmidim of Rav Mendel Mivitebsk. And he says something very interesting. And he says that each and every day that a person awakes, every day of your life, the Yetzer Hara comes to you right in the morning, and he challenges you, and he says that it is so tough to be a Jew. You have to accomplish so much. How can you possibly get up and do a whole day of Avodas Hashem? Yetzer Hara does that every single day in a person's life. But every day you have tremendous schar when right away you turn to the Yetzer Hara and say, if I really want to, I can overcome that. I can do it. Hashem helps. Hashem wants me to build this Mishkan. Hashem wants me to create Kiddush Hashem in my life. Hashem wants me to extend the efforts that it takes to be a good Jew. And if you push yourself and you work on it and you build another brick, another part of that Mishkan, there were no bricks in the Mishkan. I use that as just an example. But if you build another piece of that Mishkan, you have this special shmirah and protection. That's what Torah tells us in the last pasuk, in the last end of Seder Shemais, where we built up the whole Mishkan. Hashem is giving us that message. You have that protective cloud, the cloud that smooths out the way for you. And the Nesivos Shalom gives us also a confidence builder. The Nesivos Shalom tells us that the Torah specifically mentions and uses a cloud, uses an anan during the day to compare it to a person's life, that there are times in our lives, and many times in our lives, that we don't see the clarity, we don't see the siyata d'shmaya, we don't see Hashem helping us and providing for us and giving us our parnasa and giving us our health and providing for us. Sometimes it's very cloudy out there. And we don't see, we have a hard time connecting and seeing that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's Hashem right in front of us. So the Torah, we feel like we're in a bit of a cloud and things are not that clear. So we need to remember the Torah tells us that within that cloud, there is Hashem that is waiting for us to come back to Him. There's Hashem waiting for us to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us, and it's there to protect us. The more we want to connect, the more we want to be with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the more that cloud will clear up and help us see the things that we have to see to give us the strength to go on. And there are other times in our life where we're challenged by a fire. We're challenged by the fire of the Yetzer Hara. We're challenged by that. But we have a shmira from that too. And that is the Eish Tia Laila Boy, where we fight fire with fire. We have that. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that when you're faced with the fire of the Yetzer Hara and the surrounding culture around you, the Eish Tia Laila Boy, you have to fight where we have our Avodas Hashem with a cheshik, with a bren, where we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and do mitzvahs not just by rote and not just because we're commanded to, but if we fight fire, with the fire of Avodas Hashem and Kedusha, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the strength. When we become a mikdash, where we become the person that Hashem is comfortable being with us, where He sees that we have a fire in our Avodas Hashem, then we have that fire that leads us through the night of battling the culture and the Yetzer Hara of each and every generation. We merit that Shmira Elyoina. And during all the steps in our life, we see as we went through Seder Shemois, tell you something very, very interesting. Seder Shemois begins with Golos Mitzrayim, as we mentioned. And then after Golos and Geulas Mitzrayim, we begin and we move on with the 42 stops that they made in the Midbar. And you know, there are those stops along the way in the Midbar where we were successful, where we grew. We stopped for Kabbalas HaTorah, right? We stopped for positive things, and we grew from those. And then there were those stops. You read through the Chumash, there are those stops in the Midbar where we struggled. We had a hard time. We battled Yetzer Hara, whether it was that Klal Yisrael wanted food or protection, whatever it was. But we had our obstacles. We had things which were challenges for us. But at the end, as you know, at the end, we had a Mishkan that we looked to. At the end, we concentrated on our Kedusha. We had our times. There was up, there were downs, but we ended up in Eretz Yisrael. We ended up at the end accomplishing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to do and what we needed to do. And that essentially is the life of every person. A person has to know that by the way the world is set up, our lives are up and down. That's just the way it is. Very tough to find a person that is constantly on top of their game, to be a tzaddik every day, every minute of your life, where you're just successful, where everything works out perfectly. You really, really don't find some people like that. But we need to know that even the setbacks in our lives, just like when they stopped in the Midbar, the stops were also considered part of the Mem Beis Masois, considered the place where there was a Mishkan and a cloud and a fire. B'chol Masayhem. Rashi tells us even when they stopped, even when we have setbacks in our lives, that's part of the program. Where you use the setbacks and the times that you're stopped to say, okay, I had a bit of a hard time, but I know my destination. I'm going to pick myself up, dust myself off, and continue on the road. It's not always easy. We're going to continue where we know the key is, the Torah tells us at the end of Shemois, we built that Mishkan. We were successful. We had trouble along the way sometimes. It's tough. We had stops, we had setbacks, snakes, scorpions, all those things in the middle. But at the end, we reach our destination. And that's the lesson of Seder Shemois. From Shibud Mitzrayim to Geulas Mitzrayim to all the steps along the way that we're going to go through the Midbar for 40 years. Guess what? At the end, if you know what you're doing and you concentrate on it, then you're zoicha to have the cloud and the fire of protection, a shmira elyoina, siyata dishmaya from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we wish it on every person. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek.